Bill Barr asserted Sunday that law enforcement is not systematically racist, as he comes under fire for clearing the way for Donald Trump's photo op, but asserts no chemical irritants were used against protesters.
Do you believe there is systemic racism in law enforcement? CBS Margaret Brennan asked Barr.
I think there's racism in the United States still, but I don't think that the law enforcement system is systemically racist, he said during his Sunday morning interview with CBS News Face the Nation. I understand the distrust, however, of the African American community given the history in this country.
I think we have to recognize that for most of our history, our institutions were explicitly racist. Since the 1960s, I think we've been in a phase of reforming our institutions and making sure that they're in sync with our laws and aren't fighting a rearguard action to impose inequities, he continued.
Law enforcement, Secret Service and National Guard were used to monitor protests surrounding the White House after riots broke out following the death of George Floyd, a black man who was killed while being arrested by a white police officer in Minneapolis on Memorial Day.
The incident sparked nationwide outrage that led to unrest, riots and protests, including instances of arson, looting and confrontations between black people and police officers.
Barr was seen on Monday speaking to law enforcement officials in Lafayette Park shortly before Trump made the trek across Pennsylvania Avenue for a 5-minute trip to the church that was boarded up after it had been set on fire during riots last Sunday night.
In clearing the park, reports revealed that law enforcement used pepper spray and non-lethal bullets to disperse the crowd.
Barr claimed Sunday morning, however, that no chemical irritants were used.
The Attorney General made the claim, even though pepper spray, which he later clarified were actually pepper balls, were deployed to disperse peaceful protesters on Monday standing between and White House and St. John Episcopal Church.
No, there were not chemical irritants, Barr asserted in an interview on CBS News Face the Nation Sunday morning. Pepper spray is not a chemical irritant. It's not chemical.
Pepper balls are a way to disseminate the same irritant used in pepper spray, but in the form of essentially a paintball. They are filled with a resin, either in powder or liquid form, that is derived from peppers.
While Barr said he did feel the move to use the pepper balls to clear the park was appropriate, he did not know it was going to be used for the president to participate in a stunt at the church across the street from the White House.
During the church trip, Trump held up a Bible and called members of his cabinet to stand next to him in front of St. John's for photographers situated in front of him.
As I understand it, the park police and the Secret Service, they were the ones who carried out the movement of the crowd back one block. And I think they used their standard crowd control protocols, Barr explained.
Barr also discounted a report that claimed Trump wanted to deploy 10,000 active duty troops on the streets of Washington, D.C. to quell protesters earlier this week.
A senior defense official told NBC News on Saturday that President Trump requested the large number of soldiers during a contentious Oval Office meeting with Secretary of Defense Mark Esper on Monday.
The anonymous official told the news network that Esper instead tried to steer Trump away from a buildup of federal forces by pushing for governors from several states to send their National Guard members to the nation's capital.
A senior administration official told our CBS, David Martin, that in a meeting at the White House on Monday morning, the president demanded that 10,000 active duty troops be ordered into American streets. Is that accurate? Face the Nation host Margaret Brennan asked Barr.
No, that's completely false, he shot back. That's completely false.
The president did not demand that, she reiterated her question.
No, he did not demand that, the U.S. Attorney General, who was in the highly reported Monday meeting, asserted.
That same day of the meeting, Trump appeared for a press conference in the White House Rose Garden where he threatened to invoke the 1807 Insurrection Act, which allows the President of the United States to deploy U.S. military within its own borders to suppress civil disorder and rebellion.
In the days prior, some peaceful protests calling for police reform and an end to system racism had turned violent in the nation's capital with instances of looting, arson and destruction.
Esper did eventually airlift 1,600 active duty troops to bases in the D.C. region, to respond if needed.
However, by that time 5,000 National Guard troops were already in the city and did not require any assistance.
On Thursday, hundreds of combat soldiers with the 82nd Airborne were ordered to leave the D.C. region after only a few days there. Instances of violence and looting had dropped dramatically, and Trump had been widely rebuked for threats to deploy the military.
According to another anonymous official, the nation's top military officer, General Mark Milley, got into a shouting match with Trump after the president spoke of his wish to end the country's protests by bringing in active military forces.
The official told The New Yorker that General Milley is said to have stayed firm, responding, "I'm not doing that. That's for law enforcement."
It's unclear whether that incident took place in the same White House meeting on Monday where Trump told Esper that he wanted 10,000 troops.
On Thursday, Milley publicly rebuked Trump over his proposal to deploy U.S. armed forces in the country's own streets, sending a letter to top military leaders that said the military will continue to protect Americans' right to freedom of speech and peaceful assembly.
As members of the joint force, comprised of all races, colors, and creeds, you embody the ideals of our Constitution, Milley wrote.
Please remind all of your troops and leaders that we will uphold the values of our nation, and operate consistent with national laws and our own high standards of conduct at all times, he further stated.
We all committed our lives to the idea that is America, Milley hand wrote in as an addition to the bottom of the letter.
We will stay true to that and the American people.
Meanwhile, former Defense Secretary James Mattis also hit out at Trump by publishing scalding op-ed denouncing the president's leadership in the face of widespread protests across the country.
In a piece published on Wednesday, Mattis spoke out for the first time publicly since he was fired by Trump in 2018, blasting the commander-in-chief for threatening to deploy the military.
We must reject any thinking of our cities as a battle space that our uniformed military is called upon to dominate, he wrote.
At home, we should use our military only when requested to do so, on very rare occasions, by state governors. Militarizing our response, as we witnessed in Washington, D.C., sets up a false conflict between the military and civilian society.
It erodes the moral ground that ensures a trusted bond between men and women in uniform and the society they are sworn to protect, and of which they themselves are a part. Keeping public order rests with civilian state and local leaders who best understand their communities and are answerable to them, Mattis wrote.
I have watched this week's unfolding events, angry and appalled. The words equal justice under law are carved in the pediment of the United States Supreme Court. This is precisely what protesters are rightly demanding. It is a wholesome and unifying demand, one that all of us should be able to get behind. We must not be distracted by a small number of lawbreakers. The protests are defined by tens of thousands of people of conscience who are insisting that we live up to our values as people and our values as a nation.
When I joined the military, some 50 years ago, I swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution. Never did I dream that troops taking that same oath would be ordered under any circumstance to violate the constitutional rights of their fellow citizens, much less to provide a bizarre photo op for the elected commander-in-chief, with military leadership standing alongside.
We must reject any thinking of our cities as a battle space that our uniformed military is called upon to dominate. At home, we should use our military only when requested to do so, on very rare occasions, by state governors. Militarizing our response, as we witnessed in Washington, D.C., sets up a false conflict between the military and civilian society. It erodes the moral ground that ensures a trusted bond between men and women in uniform and the society they are sworn to protect, and of which they themselves are a part. Keeping public order rests with civilian state and local leaders who best understand their communities and are answerable to them.
James Madison wrote in Federalist 14 that America united with a handful of troops, or without a single soldier, exhibits a more forbidding posture to foreign ambition than America disunited, with 100,000 veterans ready for combat. We do not need to militarize our response to protests. We need to unite around a common purpose. And it starts by guaranteeing that all of us are equal before the law.
Instructions given by the military departments to our troops before the Normandy invasion reminded soldiers that the Nazi slogan for destroying us was divide and conquer. Our American answer is, in union there is strength. We must summon that unity to surmount this crisis, confident that we are better than our politics.
Donald Trump is the first president in my lifetime who does not try to unite the American people, does not even pretend to try. Instead, he tries to divide us. We are witnessing the consequences of 3 years of this deliberate effort. We are witnessing the consequences of 3 years without mature leadership. We can unite without him, drawing on the strengths inherent in our civil society. This will not be easy, as the past few days have shown, but we owe it to our fellow citizens, to past generations that bled to defend our promise, and to our children.
We can come through this trying time stronger, and with a renewed sense of purpose and respect for one another. The pandemic has shown us that it is not only our troops who are willing to offer the ultimate sacrifice for the safety of the community. Americans in hospitals, grocery stores, post offices, and elsewhere have put their lives on the line in order to serve their fellow citizens and their country. We know that we are better than the abuse of executive authority that we witnessed in Lafayette Square. We must reject and hold accountable those in office who would make a mockery of our Constitution. At the same time, we must remember Lincoln's better angels, and listen to them, as we work to unite.
Only by adopting a new path, which means, in truth, returning to the original path of our founding ideals, will we again be a country admired and respected at home and abroad.